An unusual fell of a woman, as if something had pulled her tight from within. As she fell, her body became stiff, but more worse, her body started to tremble with quick, uneven bursts. Her eyes were open, but unfocused, darting from one side of the room to the other. One man said, "These are forces that do not announce themselves. They wait, they observe." The woman whispered, "She's here. She's standing there." But where she pointed out, there was no one. This is the story of a woman named Betty, who started something horrific that will always stay in the dark chapters of history. Her one confession started Salem witch trials and rippled a wave of terror across the attendants. Her twitched fingers, her uneven breathing, according to the doctor, weren't because of a natural cause, but was black magic horror. In this witchcraft documentary, we will take you back to Salem, where a woman named Betty revealed something that became the foundation of witch hunting. Salem Village did not need an enemy from outside. The unease had already taken root long before anyone spoke of witches. Narrow dirt paths cut through the settlement, connecting small wooden houses that stood close enough for neighbors to hear one another, yet far enough to pretend they did not. Smoke rose from chimneys in thin lines, bending under the cold wind, carrying the scent of burned wood and boiled grain. A man leaned against a fence one morning, watching another pass by with a basket. "You're heading early," he said. The other man didn't slow down. "Work doesn't wait," he replied. The first man nodded, but added, "Neither do people watching." The second man paused just long enough to glance back, then continued walking without another word. Inside the church, the air felt heavier than outside. Samuel Parris stood at the front, his hands resting on the edges of the pulpit. "There are forces," he said, his voice steady, "that do not announce themselves. They wait, they observe." A woman sitting near the front lowered her head slightly and whispered to the person beside her, "He speaks as if he has seen them." The reply came just as quietly, "Or as if he wants us to believe he has." The benches creaked as people shifted, their eyes moving between the minister and each other, measuring reactions, weighing words. Outside, the arguments never fully ended. Land boundaries were disputed, agreements questioned, and small disagreements stretched into long-standing divisions. One evening, two men stood facing each other near a field line, marked by uneven stones. "That line was moved," one said, pointing down. The other crossed his arms. "It's been there for years." "Not like this," the first insisted. A third man passing by slowed, just enough to listen, then continued walking, later repeating the conversation to someone else. In Salem Village, nothing stayed contained. At the Parris household, the structure stood slightly apart, yet never far from attention. Windows were often watched, not openly, but through passing glances. Inside, the fire crackled softly, casting shadows that stretched along the walls. Betty Parris sat near the hearth, her eyes fixed on the flames longer than usual. Across the room, Abigail Williams leaned closer to her and said in a low voice, "Do you ever feel like someone is standing behind you, even when no one is there?" Betty did not turn. She simply said, "Don't talk like that." Abigail tilted her head slightly. "I didn't say it was real." Betty finally looked up, her voice quieter now. "Then don't make it sound like it is." The house fell silent again, but the question lingered longer than the firelight. The first time Betty fell, no one understood what they were seeing. She had been standing near the table, her hand resting lightly against the wood. When her fingers curled inward suddenly, the motion was sharp, unnatural, as if something had pulled them tight from within. "Betty?" a voice called. She did not respond. Her knees buckled, and she dropped to the floor, her body stiff before it began to shake in quick, uneven bursts. The sound of the fall echoed through the room, drawing others in. Abigail rushed forward, kneeling beside her. "Betty, stop. Just stop," she said, her hands hovering but unsure where to touch. Betty's eyes were open but unfocused, darting from one side of the room to the other. "She's here," Betty whispered, her voice barely forming the words. Abigail leaned closer. "Who?" Betty's lips moved again, but the sound came out broken, like a breath caught between fear and confusion. "She's standing there." No one stood where she pointed. A woman near the doorway pressed her hand against her chest and said, "This is not right." Another voice followed, tighter. "Get the minister." Samuel Parris entered moments later, his steps measured, his gaze fixed on the scene before him. "Speak clearly," he said, his voice controlled. "What is happening to you?" Betty's body jerked again, her arms pulling close to her chest. Abigail turned toward Parris. "She says someone is here," she said. Parris looked around the room, his eyes scanning each corner as if expecting to find something out of place. The fire crackled, but no one moved toward it. That night, the house did not sleep. The air carried a faint scent of smoke and damp wood, mixing with the tension that seemed to settle into every surface. At one point, Abigail stood near the window, staring out into the darkness. "I saw something move," she said. A voice behind her responded, "It's the wind." Abigail did not turn. "The wind doesn't stand still and watch," she replied. The next morning, another girl from the village began to show similar signs. Her movements mirrored Betty's, her voice carrying the same broken whispers. A man standing outside the house said to another, "This is spreading." The other man shook his head slowly. "Then it's not just sickness." The word was not spoken yet, but it waited, just beyond the edge of every conversation. The doctor arrived with careful steps, his boots leaving faint marks in the dirt outside the Parris home. Inside, he placed his bag on the table and approached the girls without rushing. He watched before he touched, his eyes following every movement, every sudden shift. Betty lay still for a moment. Then her fingers twitched again, her breathing uneven. Abigail stood nearby, her arms crossed tightly, her gaze fixed on the doctor, as if waiting for him to say something that would explain everything. He checked Betty's pulse, then her eyes, lifting her eyelids gently. He listened to her breathing, then stepped back, his expression unchanged. Samuel Parris stood across from him, his voice direct. "What do you see?" The doctor hesitated for a brief moment before answering. "I do not see a natural cause." The room shifted slightly, not physically, but in the way people held themselves. A woman near the wall whispered, "Then what is it?" The doctor did not answer immediately. He looked at the girls again, then at the others in the room. "It may not be of the body," he said. The words settled slowly, like dust that refused to be disturbed. Outside, the wind moved through the bare trees, carrying a low, hollow sound. Inside, Abigail stepped closer to Betty and said in a hushed tone, "You have to tell them." Betty turned her head slightly, her voice weak but clear. "She's still here," she said. Parris leaned forward. Who? He asked. Betty's lips parted, but no name came out. The questions began to build. By evening, more people had gathered. The room filled with low voices, overlapping concerns, and quiet assumptions. A man near the doorway said, "If it's not sickness, then someone did this." Another replied, "You don't know that." The first man shook his head. "Then what else is there?" The girls were brought forward again, their movements watched closely, their words repeated and examined. "Tell us," Parris said, his voice firm now. "Who is doing this to you?" Abigail looked at Betty, then back at the adults. She hesitated just long enough to draw every eye in the room toward her. Then she spoke. Tituba. The name did not echo, but it did not need to. It moved through the room quickly, carried by the shift in posture, the change in breathing, the sudden focus in every gaze. A woman near the back said, "She tells stories, strange ones." Another added, "I've heard her speaking words I don't understand." No one asked for proof. The moment the name was spoken, the direction of everything changed.